Hello, everyone. Professor Dave here. I promised in my email that I would send you guys a video today talking through the ACT Utilitarianism application assignment. So this is the video where I'll do that. But like with everything else, and I can't stress this enough, what I'm going to say assumes that you have read the course materials, the textbook chapter, and watch the videos for this stuff. That's going to form the context for helping make sense out of these directions and give you the best chance to succeed when you work on the assignments. So do not start working on the assignments until you've done the learning stuff, the reading, the watching the videos, and so on. Okay, that helps put everything into perspective. So to find the stuff you need for the ACT Utilitarianism assignment, go to the module 5, the chapter 5 assignments in the course content area. I'm sharing my screen here. If you scroll down, the first little subfolder you'll see will be the ACT Utilitarian Application Assignment. In that little area, you'll find the instructions and the drop box where you submit the paper when you're finished. Just like with the Identification and Analysis assignment, click in here and you'll find the document itself. It may be less important to download this one than it was the Identification and Analysis assignment, but if you want to, that's a perfectly fine thing to do as well. So basically, this assignment is going to ask you to apply the utility principle from ACT Utilitarianism, right? So you're going to apply it to the Identification and Analysis assignment that you did for chapter 4, right? So you're going to use the utility principle to help Randy resolve the problem that he encountered at the picnic, right? So again, be sure that you've read the chapter and watched the videos about utilitarianism, and it's probably a really good idea to watch the video on applying ACT Utilitarianism. And if you want to focus in a little bit more specifically on the section in the textbook, look from pages 134, where it says applying ACT Utilitarianism, through page 137 for some suggestions about how to set things up. Okay, so there's your little pro tip as far as that's concerned. But make sure that you've watched that video and read the chapter first. So now into the actual instructions to the assignment. Go back and look at the case study picnic nitpick again. Just make sure that you have a clear understanding of the case, remember what the problem is, right? So then as you get started working on this, you have to remind yourself what were the options that you came up with and who are your stakeholders that you laid out in your chapter 4 assignment, your identification and analysis. So have a look at your chart and your options again. That's really going to be the key bit as far as applying utilitarianism is concerned, and make any changes that I suggested to you in my assignment feedback before you go on to do the application, if that's possible, right? So basically the way that this assignment is going to work is I want you to show me you understand, you can think as if you're an ACT utilitarian, okay? So what you're going to do is basically lay out the principle for me and then explain it, and then go on to apply it to the options that you saw or that you came up with in your identification and analysis. Okay, so it doesn't matter whether or not you agree with this principle. That's not really the point. Or if this is your favorite ethical theory that we're going to talk about, again, not a big deal. I just want you to demonstrate that you understand the principle by being able to use the principle, right? And so you'll see that pattern again in some future assignments as well. So again, a reminder, this is a sort of preview of coming attractions when you do your application step in your critical thinking paper that's coming up relatively soon. This is basically how it will be set up as well. Okay, and so for each of your application papers, this is basically the format. So start by stating the exact wording of the principle as it appears in the textbook or notes. Okay, so here it says start your ACT utilitarian application by stating the utility principle word for word exactly as it appears in the moral compass, right? So I want you to memorize the wordings of these principles that you guys are learning. So in the case of the utility principle, the right action is the one that tends to produce the greatest possible balance of happiness over unhappiness for the greatest possible number, right? That's the principle. So state that for me as clearly as you can in its exact wording. Then I want you to go on and explain what the principle means in your own words, right? So the textbook goes through a description of what the utility principle is all about. There are some key concepts that are associated with that, like the idea of net utility. and how one goes about calculating it. There's a definition of what counts as what's morally important for the utilitarians that's included in that principle. So I want you to explain all that stuff in your own words. Don't copy what the textbook says. Translate that out into your own verbiage and explain it to me that way. One sort of good way of thinking about this is to pretend that I'm your student and that I don't know anything about this principle and you're trying to explain to me how it works, right? So use that as sort of your benchmark. Like, all right, so I'm your friend, we're having a conversation. I'm like, what's this utility principle thing all about? When you're teaching it to me, tell me what it says and then explain it to me in a way that I can understand it, that shows me also that you know what you're talking about, right? So that should take a good paragraph or two explaining what the principle is all about, right? Then I want you to go on to calculate the net utility of each of the options from your analysis chart, right? So in your identification and analysis assignment, you came up with at least 4 options and at least 5 stakeholders who are going to be affected by in the case study that you discussed, right? So here, in using the utility principle, you need to calculate the net utility of each of those options. So you'll recall that that means figuring out who's going to be happy and who's going to be unhappy, and then doing a little bit of math, right? So I would like you to go through and calculate the net utility for each of the options that you laid out, right? So make sure that you assign all of the stakeholders numbers in terms of whether they'd be happy or unhappy, and then do the math to show me what the net utility actually is. So add up the numbers and tell me here's the net utility. I would also like you to explain a little bit why you assign the numbers that you do to the individual stakeholders. So you might say, well, look, Randy would be unhappy about this because, and so I give him a, you know, a -2 or something like that. So explain kind of why you're putting the numbers in that you do. Then if you want to use a chart to do that, like it shows up in the textbook, that's perfectly okay. What you could do is use your analysis chart, add numbers and another column to it or row on it where you calculate the net utility, and then substitute some explanation for why you put those numbers in, or you can make a new chart. You don't have to use a chart, but I would like to see you still assign numbers and do the net utility calculations to show me which of the options produces the most happiness. Then at the end, the last thing is to just say as clearly as you can which of the options the utility principle would tell Randy to choose, right? So if Randy were an ACT utilitarian, how should he decide this? Which of the 4 options you came up with would be the right one on the basis of your net utility calculations? So just come out and say, here's the right choice for Randy if he's an ACT utilitarian. Just like with the other paper, I want you to format it in terms of MLA or APA formatting standards. That means things like setting your line spacings and your margins, your font size, etc. Again, I've got the link to Purdue's OWL online writing lab here where you can find examples of how to format papers. Please do your level best to get everything as clean looking as possible and practice those compositional skills. So I think that's basically it. When you're finished with your assignment, put it in the Dropbox and then I'll score it and give you guys feedback and ways that you might be able to improve if you decide to use the utility principle on your critical thinking paper. But I think the key bit is just making sure that you explain the principle as well as you can and then do the net utility calculations to the best of your ability. Assign happiness units to each of the stakeholders, then do the math for each of the options to decide which of those is the right choice. And then you've pretty much got the spirit of how the utility principle works. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. And now I guess I'll leave you to it. Good luck.